Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to this part 2 of Dr. Florencia Henshaw's present workshop with us, Interpersonal Speaking, Pedagogical Considerations and Practical Challenges. If for some reason you happen to miss part 1, no worries, that is already uploaded to the Sketch platform as well as our YouTube channel. You can view it there. And of course, this second part of our workshop will be recorded and uploaded right back to Sketch and to our YouTube channel once it's all done. And don't forget to stick around for the end to fill out the feedback form so that you can get entered into our giveaway for our 2022 PD Extravaganza. Dr. Henshaw, take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to session 2. How's everyone doing today? We're doing good. Does everybody know where to type in the chat? Here we go. Hi, everybody. Were you here for session 1? If you can tell me in the chat real quick, were you here for session 1 yesterday? Yes, no. If it's a no, that's totally okay. Joe Barker. Oh, Joe is here. Oh, wow. Okay. Yes, yes. Yes, it was great. Thank you. Okay, C. Yes, you can answer in any language you'd like. Okay. A few no's, some C's, some yeses. Okay. It's okay if you were not here. So session 1 focused a lot on what is interpersonal speaking, what we're going to consider interpersonal speaking. And then we talked a lot about learner-learner interaction, which we will continue a little bit today. But today we're going to focus more on interaction with the instructor as well as with other interlocutors. Which I understand the other interlocutors is a little bit tricky in some contexts, but I still want to bring it up in case you could make it work. I think it's good for the students to have as many different interlocutors as possible, not just always the instructor and always other students. We need to show them that the language thrives outside of the classroom. And then, yes, we're going to be talking about assessment. So let's talk about interaction with the instructor. As with interaction with learners, there are pros and cons. Some pros of interacting with the instructor as opposed to just with other students is that it tends to be better for novice learners because you, as the trained professional, can adjust the level of the input, can make yourself understood in many different ways. You know how to adjust the questions that you're asking. You can tell if the student is understanding or not, right? And you can rephrase, etc. Sometimes in learner-learner interaction, that doesn't happen simply because the learners are not trained, to do all that. And sometimes it's not that, but they just don't have the language to rephrase or to make themselves understood in another way other than using a shared language. Another pro of interacting with the instructor is that you can have more control of negotiation of form and meaning. As we talked about last session, many times the students may not say that something is wrong simply because they don't want to put their classmate on the spot, or sometimes because they're not sure if something is truly wrong or not. And sometimes even if they didn't understand, they want to keep going with the conversation. When you are involved, you can intervene, so to speak. You can react to things. You can ask for clarification. And also, you know when to ask and when not to ask, right? Sometimes let it go and keep talking. Sometimes you do want to understand and you want to ask them, what did you mean by that? No comprendo, right? Something like that. The con, I guess, of interacting with the instructor has to do with the individual level. Usually there's lower individual participation in the sense that if you do a whole class, then you may interact with some of the students, but if you have big classes, 20 plus, it's difficult to engage with everyone. Even if you do something like what I do, which is talking one-on-one or in small groups, you can do that every week. You cannot do that 2-3 times a week, right? So we have many more students than only one instructor. So that's a little bit of the con of interaction with the instructor. The frequency, and especially frequency of individual interactions. When we think about whole class interaction, which is a type of interpersonal communication, some of the examples that come to mind are things like picture talk, calendar talk, movie talk, etc. Have you done any of these? And you can type in the chat Do you have experience with any of these? Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you not know what I'm talking about? Has it worked well for you or not? I see some yes, picture talk, okay. I saw a couple no's and it was great. Movie talk, okay. Calendar talk, somebody said, I kind of know what you're talking about, but no experience, okay. Some movie talk. Yes, Daniela says, can you explain what you mean? Yes, absolutely, Daniela. So these are, if you know about the CI movement, right? You essentially use a picture or maybe a short video clip, sometimes with no sound, sometimes with sound, or even calendar of events, calendar of what's happening this week, and you engage the students in Q&A, right? So you ask them some questions and then the students tell you. So for example, if you're doing calendar talk, let's see what, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the comments. You have a stimulus up front and you're asking questions, right? Yes, yes. So if you have, for example, in the case of calendar talk, right? And if you show them a calendar of events of the community where the target language is spoken, and you can ask them questions like, for example, do you see more sporting events or music events, right? And you ask them questions to see how well they're understanding it and engaging with this resource, the picture, the calendar, the movie. And you obviously pause the video. It's not like you're talking and the video keeps going. You pause the video, you ask them some questions, you keep going and so forth. Now, I think that these could be great techniques, but the question that I have is, do they have any purpose other than to provide input or to elicit output? What I see a lot in the picture talk itself or the calendar talk itself is that they mainly have a pedagogical purpose, to provide input, to get the learners to understand what you're saying and to respond to it, or sometimes to elicit output. And that by itself, it's a good thing, right? We do many things in our classes that have just pedagogical purposes. I get that. The question is, what if the students lose interest, right? So after the third, fourth question, what if some students just start daydreaming and they're no longer paying attention to you? Could you just keep going? Sometimes you keep going and some of the students sort of fall behind or they just get distracted, right? So how do we make sure that everyone is being engaged with it? And I think the key thing is to make sure that we know we're going somewhere with it, right? That the questions are not purely and just simply and 100% just to provide input or just to elicit output. We want to do something with that information, hopefully, either immediately, later in the lesson, but you're going somewhere with it. So one possibility that we provide in Common Ground would be to do picture talk, but with a greater purpose, like you were getting there, of doing visual analysis, right? So now it's not simply to provide input or to elicit output, but rather is to guide the learners in more critical thinking about the painting that they're looking at, and then potentially write a few sentences at the end, sort of summarizing what they have noticed and what messages they think the painting is conveying. So what I'm trying to point out, this is not the only option, of course, but what I'm trying to point out is that, yes, a lot of the questions are things that we know the answer to. What do you see? What adjectives can you use to describe it? Many of those things, of course, we see the picture, we see what they look like. But the questions are there to get the students little by little to start thinking about more of the messages of the painting. So we have a bigger purpose than just input and output. And this is just an excerpt. The full example is in chapter 6 of Common Ground. And so in general, what I prefer to do is to move from talk to task instead of just staying at the picture talk and movie talk, which can be great. And sometimes for entertainment purposes is a purpose too. And I think that's fantastic and keep doing it. But if you notice that the students are losing interest because clearly the questions are just to practice a particular set of vocab or a particular structure, then how can we give it more of a bigger purpose than just to practice language? So some ideas here would be to do a decision-making task or an infogap task as a whole class. So for example, if you do a decision-making task, the students are helping you decide something. If you do an infogap, you, the instructor, become student A, the rest of the class is student B. So this is one example of a whole class infogap. Classic infogap is to follow directions, right? One person provides directions, the other person follows in the map. So you could be student A with the map, and the class can be student B giving you directions. And then what I would suggest, so that you don't get always the same 1 or 2 students doing the work for everybody else, is you call on students to keep going with the directions. And that way everybody has to pay attention to what others have said so far, so they can follow along in their maps too. But then they need to tell you the next step, and then the next step, and then where do I turn and where do I go? Do I cross here? Now you are involved in this. So you can act as lost as you want. You can do the wrong turn and see if they're paying attention and telling you, no, right, left, right? So you are still in control because you are one of the participants. And also, of course, make sure that they're staying on the target language too. In terms of following directions, it doesn't always have to be a map. It could be a picture reconstruction. So for example, if you have an empty classroom, and then they're going to help you figure out where things go. And there are two ways you can do it. Either the students do it more like free will and everybody contributes to decorating this classroom, or you could have one already made. And so they have to follow to recreate this particular original picture. And the items that I'm showing here are actually on Canva. If you've ever used Canva for creating social media graphics and things like that, they have templates like this as well, where you can have, you can then transfer them to something like Jamboard, and then the students can easily move things around, or even Whiteboardify if you want them to each have their own screen. Another example of a whole class infogap could be something like a spot the differences task, but instead of spot the differences, we're going to find the similarities. And there are different versions of a similar picture. This is a picture that I found online, and then just with PowerPoint, I edited it to have slightly different things happening, right? And so in one case, I can't remember what it could be that I copied the same picture 3 times, and I'm sorry if I did. They're all the same. I think I made a copy paste error, but technically they should be 3 different pictures. And then you keep the original for yourself, and then all the class has to find the similarities across all 3 versions of the picture. So in some cases, you're going to say one thing, and then one student is going to say, yes, me too, right? Same picture, right? Same here. But then someone else has a different version and is going to say, no, that one's different. So everybody has to pay attention. They cannot rely just on one person answering you. And of course, you can always call on students again, right? So if you want, you can do that too, especially if you notice that the same people are always the same ones participating. And I would definitely recommend that you keep the originals for yourself so that you make sure that whatever they're telling you makes sense, that they're not making it up, right? You see the pictures too. An alternative, if you don't want to do pictures and you want to do it a little bit more thematically specific to your unit, it could be something like class schedules. And so in a class schedule with some differences, but a lot of similarities, you could be asking questions about the classes they're taking, the time, the location, the professor. And so at the end of the day, things that you can spot, see if everybody has the same thing. For example, do we all have a class with Professor Henshaw? Is there a class where we're all in? Can we find a time where nobody's taking class and we can get together to study, right? So you're giving the purpose that goes beyond simply showing the schedule and asking questions about the schedule. Another example of working all together as a class could be collaborative tasks. In this case, this is a collaborative drawing. So for example, you can tell them, if you work with younger students, even college students would like this too. Let's draw a monster. And so you start, because you need to give them a little bit of that, the first steps, right, to get comfortable with it, right? So you start describing some parts of it, and everybody draws. You can draw too, or just the students draw, and that way you are free to monitor and make sure that everybody is on task and everybody's understanding. And then you call on students to add to the drawing, right? So you describe just a little bit of it, and now, okay, John, tell me, Grant, tell me, Amanda, add something else, right? So little by little, all the students are contributing to the drawing. So whatever Amanda said, we all have to draw it. If we don't understand what Amanda said, we're gonna ask her, right, to clarify. So it's a bit of a whole class task. An alternative, if you don't want to do that, could be that the students describe and you draw. I cannot even draw a stick figure, so I don't know how that would work, but I guess my students would have a lot of fun watching me draw. So maybe that could be a good thing, that they would be motivated to want to trick me to draw the most difficult thing possible. And that could be motivating for them to want to contribute to the drawing. Another type of collaborative task that you can do with the whole class and engage in negotiation of form and interaction could be collaborative writing. So you can display what you're typing. So if you have a projector, and you can display what you're typing on your computer, and then the students, if you don't, of course, you can just do the board. It doesn't have to be a computer. A computer is just a little bit easier, especially for me. I'm very slow writing on the board. And you co-construct as a whole class, for example, a summary, or maybe you co-construct a story. You co-construct a dialogue that is happening at a restaurant or at a specific place, maybe something that you have for sale in the classroom, a restaurant review, right? And so you can guide them with questions. You write it, maybe as you write it, you ask them, wait, how do you write it? You write it like this or like that, right? So you can ask them questions and engage in that negotiation with the students. So question for you. This was an example that we saw yesterday, and it was supposed to be a task that the students would complete with other learners, right? That in step 2, it says speak with at least 5 different classmates. Okay, so how could we adapt this idea? And we can tweak it as much as you want, but how can we adapt it so it's whole class interaction and you as the instructor are also involved, as opposed to just letting the students talk to each other? What ideas do you have? Let's see, I'm trying to monitor the chat if there were some questions too. Yeah, somebody commented gradual release into other interaction formats like small groups. Yeah, right. So some of them you can start with whole class and then turn it into, okay, now you, right now you in pairs. Yes, you can definitely do that. Ryan, as a class survey, says Emmy, yes, absolutely. Suggest activities and then the scale, right? So we're co-constructing the first part. Yes, love it. Have students ask the instructor about their preferences? Yes. Yes, absolutely. The instructor can be the person going on a trip, maybe. Class survey, yes. Teacher could describe their preference and ask the group. Okay, right. So again, we're putting the teacher preference, yeah, on the spot here. Turn it into, I'm sorry if I don't read your suggestion, I promise. I'm just scrolling through them as fast as I can. Turn it into 4 corners. Oh, interesting. I guess that could be one, right? So you turn it more into an input activity. The issue with the only thing that I would add, I would wonder is if the students are silent the whole time, right? And you're the only one talking. I'm not sure that would be entirely interpersonal, right? That the students would be kind of just following their friend. Maybe we would need to find how can we tweak it so that there is more interaction with the students, this back and forth, right? Okay. Create the categories, yeah, so get the students to be more involved in co-creating the first part. Yeah, so the one that Amanda suggests is a little bit similar to the original, right? So that the students are talking to each other and then debrief as they do in step 3. And it's true that maybe we can just tweak the last step to make it a little bit more interactive, right? Possibly, yes. Yeah, so graph the class responses. Yeah, so we can combine that to some of the ideas that other people mentioned in terms of a class survey. So yes, we can certainly turn it into a class survey where maybe the students are researching different aspects of traveling, right? So maybe one group is focusing on where they stay. Some group is focusing on the destination. Some group is focusing on the activities, right? And so they're doing this class surveys, but everybody's not asking all the same questions. And then at the end, I love the idea of graphing, right? We put it all together in our class, right? So the group that did destination, tell me what you found out, right? I think it's a great idea. And then everybody's contributing to this one product. That is fantastic. Okay, very good. Do we have more? I'm sorry. The 20 questions. Yes, you can change it into a 20 questions. Okay, yes. Oh, okay, so if we do the 4 corners, Shannon suggested an alternative to make it more interpersonal. So maybe that the students in that corner need to exchange information about their experiences. Okay, yes, right. So now we found a way of introducing something interpersonal. Yes, okay. Beautiful. All right, let's keep going. One of the suggestions, I think it was Grant, but I saw others suggested it too, to put the instructor on the spot, right? For the instructor to talk about their own preferences. And that can certainly be a way of doing whole class interpersonal, where the students interview you. And once again, you are one of the participants, so you have a lot of control in terms of the information, the negotiation, right? And the students, at least my students, always seem curious to know about you. So they are interested in learning about you as well. So the example that I have here is one potential way of structuring it. And so you would need to come up with a situation and materials if they need it. I think it's always good to bring some input in there too. And the example of help me find a house for rent is actually an example that I did when I went on a job interview and we had to do, a teaching demo with actual students. And so the students were locals, I was not. So I was like, if I get the job and I move here, where should I live? And I created some ads based on what I would find online. And so the students had these possible ads, and some of them were big houses, small houses, with yard, not yard. Some of them were very far, right? I put a variety. And so first the students had to interview me to get some information about me, my life, how many people, do I have dogs? And yes, I have 4 dogs, so that was very important. If I have a car to drive to campus, right? So they had to ask me some questions in order to then make the best recommendation out of the ads that they had. And what I would suggest is that in the part where they interview you, that you help them generate some ideas in terms of things that they can ask you. I think if you leave them 100% on their own, they may come up with 1 or 2 questions, but then they struggle to think like, what else can we ask? So give them some hints, right? Things like pets, location, cost. Do I have to drive, right? Like just help them, anticipate different things that they can ask you to make the best possible recommendation. And then the purpose of all those questions and gathering that information from me was to state the recommendation, which one was the best, plan A. And if plan A was no longer available, maybe that house was no longer in the market, then what would be plan B and why? And the why was using the information that they got from me. This is just one idea in terms of how you could structure it. But of course, it doesn't have to be a house for rent, right? They can recommend other things. So now it's your turn. This is the application portion of the workshop. So what I would like you to do is to think of an activity around the students interviewing you that would work for your students, for yourself. And this is just a suggestion, right? So you start with a topic and purpose, maybe it's related to one unit that you usually do. What kind of thing do you want them to recommend, decide, or find out? And then the instructions, very basic. You don't have to create the full activity to be used tomorrow, but how are you going to prepare them in step one? What do you do, right? Step 2 would be the actual interview. So there's not a lot that you need to write for that part, unless you want to make it very specific to a particular format. And then the step 3 is the so what, right? What are the students going to do with that information that they got from you? So I'm going to give you a few minutes. I'm trying to catch up on the comments that I see in the chat. Sorry. Grant, your students mock your responses? Okay.
It's part of being a young adult male.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you a few minutes. And then when you're ready to share your ideas about what your students can do, you can open a Google Doc, write on paper, whatever you're comfortable with. So think about what activity can you do using this format.
Okay, Florencia, would you mind clarifying just the pre-interview part real quick?
Yes, am I muted? No, I'm
Oh,
not. Sorry, my computer's very slow. So the pre-interview is more of the what would you give them? So in this case here, right? So I gave them several ads. So I gave them some time to read the ads and then generate ideas of what they could ask me. The interview itself, you don't have to write it out. Technically, the students would ask you questions, right? So, but it's more like the setup of the activity. And then what do they do? In this case, they recommend a plan A and a plan B. So what would you do for the step 3? So you don't have to write the step 2 too much, but more of the what happens before they ask you questions, what happens after they ask you questions. And if you're ready to share, you can share in the chat. Okay, I love the ideas, but it was funny. I was reading Grant's idea and Zoom moved it because somebody else posted something. So I read the so what of Caitlin, and I'm like, how did we get from colleges to a restaurant? I'm like, wait, what? Okay. So I got lost for a second. I thought we're going to a restaurant with the students to talk about colleges. I got confused, but now I realized that Zoom just moved the answers. Okay, so the ideas that I'm seeing so far, I'm going to share for people who are watching the recording. So one could be that students ask you questions about different colleges, and then you give them some inside info, maybe, and then the students, take that into consideration and rank which ones they would want to go. Okay. So you can be almost like the college rep, right, too. That I like that a lot, yeah. Caitlin suggested restaurant recommendations. I love that. Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of the pre-interview, maybe come up with items important to consider when choosing a restaurant. Absolutely. And then of course, they're going to ask you maybe some minutes to prepare. Yes. And then the so what, you go to the restaurant. I love that. Yes, if you absolutely, I think that would be so good to actually go to the restaurant that they recommend, and then you tell them if you like it or not. That's very good. If you did not, I will never trust the recommendations again. Oh my God, Caitlin, I love that. My students would have a blast with that. I wonder if they would like on purpose send me to a bad restaurant though, but okay. Alejandro. Travel agent to help plan a vacation. Yes, I love that. Yeah, and you can make it similar to the one before of things that are important to consider. You can definitely tie it to that, right? So if you did some output on travel preferences, now it's their turn to help you plan. Love it. Emmy, oh, I love that. Students help you decide what pet to adopt. That would be dangerous with me because I would probably end up adopting all of them. But yes, what a great idea. Review different animals available for adoption and then discuss what factors affect what pet you can have, right? Absolutely. Oh, Emmy, love it. Okay. I'm trying to catch up. There's a lot of messages. I don't know that I can share everyone's. I want to be mindful of time, but I love if you can scroll through the chat and see all of the information that people are suggesting. Claudia, also a cool restaurant. Very good. A weekend activity. Yes, that's very good. Love that, Ayumi. Love that idea too. Information about beaches in our state. Oh, to go to the beach. Oh, very nice. We don't have beaches here. All we have is corn and soy. But yes, you can do that. Chris, what to wear? Oh, what to wear for your daughter's wedding? Oh, that is so good, right? And there's so many things that they can ask you. Yes, very good. Chores at the house. Okay. I'm trying to decide the what are they helping you decide? So they're asking you what chores you typically do, Amanda?
Yeah,
I think
this
if
is
I'm understanding.
That's kind of the different stages of the activity, where some of it is what you do in class where they're asking you and then they take it and do something else with asking and come back and compare. But it would be like maybe you have people who are living together and they're going to make recommendations about who should do which duties in the house. It can go into something like that. So
I like that. Who wants to live with la profesora? Yes, let's see who can who is willing to live with me. Oh my God, I should try that and see. That probably none of them want to. With all of my dogs. Yeah. Okay. Wendy. Okay. There's plenty more. I do want to be mindful of time. Thank you so much for sharing these great ideas. I'm going to keep scrolling after we're done so that I can read all of them. Which movie to watch, what book to read. Yes. So many good recommendations. Okay, good. So keep up the good work. If you haven't had a chance to post it so other participants can see it. So I'm going to keep going. Let's talk a little bit about interaction with other target language speakers. As with anything that we've been talking about and anything related to teaching, there are pros and cons. To me, it has a lot of pros, especially if you teach college. One of the pros is that they get exposed to new cultural perspectives, new language varieties. There's an entire new audience, and so it is a new challenge for them. Some students get too comfortable, right? Just talking with classmates, just talking with the teacher, and it's good for them to get out of their comfort zone in a safe manner. We're not saying I'm going to put you in a plane and I'm going to send you to another country and good luck to you. This is a little bit more controlled, just for 30 minutes in a platform that is safe, right, and so forth, but it's still a new person. It's not a friend. It's not a family member. It's not the students that form the Spanish club. This is a whole new person whose reality may be very different from yours, right? And we need to have those skills to talk to different people too. Some of the cons, and yes, these are still challenges, logistical challenges. Now we have, Zoom, and we can do so many more things that many years ago we couldn't do. So that's good. But yes, we still have different time zones. Many of those platforms are paid. even if you're going to do it yourself, there's still a lot of coordination that needs to happen. So it is definitely challenging logistically. In terms of the learners themselves, having a new audience and being outside of your comfort zone is good, but you have to be mindful that it may be too intimidating for some learners. So you need to figure out a way of helping them feel truly prepared and in a safe space. Now, we're all getting nervous. We get nervous when we're talking to somebody new. That's going to happen, but you need to be mindful if it's going to be just maybe too much for one person, and then talk to them and help them figure out something that might work a little better. There's plenty of platforms out there, some paid, some free, that connect students with speakers of different target languages. As you can imagine, many of them, yes, English and Spanish still tend to be the biggest ones, but they're not only English and Spanish. Some of the ones that, I mean, I have piloted all of them, and I mean pilot with a few students, but that I've used in courses with entire classes. That will be Talk Abroad, Conversify, Lingua Meeting, and Language Amigo. And out of all those, Talk Abroad always comes out on top in terms of customer service, in terms of the number of speakers available, speakers from many different countries. I teach Spanish, so that for me is important. So usually Talk Abroad is my go-to. Language Amigo, I wanted to support them because they're right here, started by Latinx entrepreneurs right here in Illinois. And it works well, but the challenge is that they don't have as many speakers for the students to connect with, and so sometimes availability is an issue. And then the other ones, for one reason or another, just it didn't work for us. That's all I'm going to say. The free platforms like HelloTalk and Speaky, my students have used them and they have reported back on whether they liked it or not, but I told them it's free. So there's a lot of risk here, and they were not obligated to use it. So they chose to do it. And some of them like it because they're, you know, more adventurous and they're okay with meeting all kinds of people. But others, which I respect, I don't want to meet a stranger online. So I prefer more of the controlled platforms. And then italki is an interesting one. Italki is used a lot by individuals because you can just contact a teacher and say, hey, can you help me practice this? Can you do a lesson on that, right? And some of them are very, very, very affordable. And these are people that sometimes, you know, they just need the extra income, and they're very good teachers. So maybe you as a teacher can contact them, get in touch with them and see if it could work for your students, for your class, arrange something with that person. There are other alternatives if you don't want to use one of these platforms. One of them would be to do something like virtual guest speakers. And I know that the Happy World Foundation has been setting them up for classrooms. So this would be the entire class connects with one person, one guest speaker. So you can check that out. And then another way of doing it, just sort of doing it yourself, would be a little bit more of an asynchronous interview where the students post videos on a platform like Flipgrid, now called Flip. And then the person records answers, and they can be short answers, 20, 30 seconds. On their own. So you don't have to coordinate schedules. You don't have to coordinate time zones. And then the students also have more time to watch the answers again. You as the instructor can provide some scaffolding. Let's watch the answer together and let's see how much, you know, we can understand, right? So it gives you, I think it's a little bit better for novice learners. And then you remove the anxiety of talking to somebody in real time. Of course, you miss some of that back and forth, right? So some of that back and forth gets a little bit lost if you do an asynchronous interview. My tips, if you are interested in connecting students with speakers of the target language outside of your classroom, and especially if you're going to use any of these platforms that are paid, the first one would be to pilot them, to try before you buy and try before you assign to an entire class. And I say that from experience. I have tried platforms that after a month, everyone disappeared. My students were waiting and waiting and nobody would show up. And so you don't want to make, assign it to all 20 students, big high stakes assignment, and then everybody disappears. So always make sure that you try it and that you get the students' feedback on it. I would also encourage you that if you're going to go for this, that you try multiple exchanges as opposed to one exchange and done. If they only talk to one person one time, 30 minutes, and that was it, there's going to be some impact. There's going to be some novelty. There's going to be something interesting. But the big effects, you see them the more they have this chance to interact with people. Because the first time they're super nervous, and I would be too, but the second time and the third time you get more and more comfortable, and then you start appreciating the experience more and more. I would also say that this is best for intermediate, low, and up. I would not put a novice learner into the situation on a one-on-one with a speaker. And I understand that, of course, you may not have the exact proficiency level of your students, but at least what I mean is not first, second year, right? So I would probably wait until the students have some more language skills before you do something like this. And if not, then at least maybe try to do groups, try to do the guest speaker, right? Try to do something different, but I wouldn't have them do individual conversations on their own until they're intermediate, low, and up. And provide some structure. I think all learners need it, even advanced students need it, just to anticipate what the conversation is going to be like. What are we talking about? What is it going to, what are we doing? What are each of us doing? But I think that is so important. Even if they're intermediate low, give them room to choose, right? They should have some choice in the questions and the number of questions and all of that. I have watched or listened to the recordings of some of the students, even in Talk Abroad, and some of them are intermediate, low, intermediate, mid. And at one point, the student is like, can I just ask you the questions I have to ask you, and then we can talk about something else? Because the students just want to talk about something else. It's okay, right? We don't want to put them into this box. Yes, they had to research a particular topic and the student asked questions, but then the student wanted to talk about something else. Please do, right? So let them choose, let them have freedom and not be super structured. And definitely don't turn it into an oral exam, right? The students shouldn't go in thinking, oh my God, if I don't remember this word, I'm gonna get points off. It's not about that. It is not about that. They need to feel as comfortable as possible. Just have fun with it. And I know that it sounds perhaps very generic to say have fun with it, but really that's what we want most of it, just to highlight the affective side of it, the motivational side of it, much more than the linguistic side of it. And this is what we do in Talk Abroad. This is our 5th semester. So after 2 years, this is what the students do. And so the first part, it takes a while, is the preparation part, and that involves preparation both in terms of the language, but also affective preparation. The students do answer some questions in terms of how nervous they are, whether they've had experiences before, they talk about it in class, right? We want them to feel heard and supported, that if they're feeling anxious, it's not just them by themselves alone and we don't care, right? We want them to understand this. One of the things they do, they read some of the things that previous students have said, because sometimes that helps them anticipate what other students went through as well. We want them to be very familiar with the platform so that we prevent any kind of technical issues before they have the conversation. We let them choose the topic. It has to be related to the course, but they have a lot of freedom to choose. We ask them to have one conversation first, and then we do a check-in in class. How did it go? What kinds of things can we help you with before you continue on with other conversations? Then they continue on. And then the last part is the report, where they do reflection, comparisons, and connections. And just to give you an example, one of the things that came up in the check-in after the first conversation was like, oh my God, my partner said, te puedo vocear. And they're like, what is voceo, right? And so for them in Spanish, right, like different forms of address. And so things like that come up in the conversation. You didn't anticipate it in all the preparation you did. things come up. So it's good for them to have it just one conversation, and then we're going to talk about it, right? You don't have to be nervous about, doing more conversations. In terms of preparing them for it, because it's so important to do the good preparation for it. Part of it is the linguistic aspect of it, and you have to do a little bit of ear training. Not every student may have had experience interacting with people from that particular regional variety. So if you can, try to get them comfortable with different varieties of the language. And so a couple of things that you can do and that we do is I downloaded some of the audio from actual conversations, asked the students for permission, obviously no names. I segmented the audio, and then I created comprehension questions. So they're listening to an actual conversation using the same platform that they're going to use. And then they're answering listening comprehension questions. So I know that they're paying attention to what they're saying too. And then another thing that you can do is something like bimodal input. So have them read the transcript of somebody's response, but maybe some words you change. And so let's see how much they can pick up on. Not, he said perro instead of gato, right? Just for them to do this ear training of picking up sounds and words. And then you can use audio from speakers of that variety if you can, ideally, of course, if you can. If not, at least try to get somebody to speak as naturally as possible. And you can do an activity like that. For Spanish, there is a lot online. Audiolingua has a lot of MP3 files and many other languages too. Since I have used Talk Abroad and I have access to all of those conversations, I can use the actual speakers to just ask colleagues, right? Just ask a friend, can you just record something real quick for me? And sometimes we do it. I'm Argentinian. If you need an Argentinian to record something, just let me know. And then answer your own questions is something that we have them do, because sometimes the students come up with these questions that are wonderful. But the speakers, the conversation partners are not like experts in every possible topic in the world. So then we're like, how would you answer if somebody asked you that about the US? Could you answer your own question? And sometimes that's when they get, that's when they notice things like, oh, maybe I'm going to say, maybe this is going to result in an overgeneralization, or maybe the person's going to feel uncomfortable. When you have to answer your own question is when you notice things about the question itself. And again, you can do it in writing or recorded, whatever you want to do. And it's also good to anticipate language, what kind of language and content is going to come up that the person may give you. Another way to help them prepare for it is to work on their fluency a little bit. And so they can discuss the same topic, but with classmates. And so you can do something like in a speed dating format, which is, you put them in rows, they have 5 minutes or whatever, and then switch, 5 minutes and switch, and so forth. A similar one is the 4-3-2 activity. And this one is definitely meant to increase fluency. And that is when the students have 4 minutes to talk, switch partners. Now you have 3 minutes to talk about the same thing again. So there's this task repetition. And then now you switch partners and you have only 2 minutes to talk. And so the more we say the same thing and then we do take 2, take 3, the better we get at it, right? So you see some increase in accuracy, maybe not huge, and that's okay. But at the very least, you do notice this increase in fluency, right? That the words you're saying in a shorter amount of time. Something else that I think is very important to prepare them for it, and not just interacting with other speakers, just in general too, things like communicative strategies, right? How do you react to something someone is telling you? You'd be surprised how many times the students just say, okay, or interesting. No matter what the person said, everything is interesting or everything is okay. Or they just move on, but you never acknowledge what the person told you. So I think it's good to give them some things that they could say to react to different things that the person is sharing with them. How do you ask for help? Circumlocution, I think this is something that we should be working on throughout, not just in preparation for this. And some of the examples that I give here are things like when you're working on your vocab, for example, to get them used to the circumlocution. So if you're going to do a two-way crossword puzzle, for example, one student has half of the words, the other student has the other half. They need to help each other complete the puzzle. Nobody has the definitions. We need to describe that word or define that word for the classmate so the classmate can complete the puzzle. Even things like the define, act, draw activity, right? And you can do it either as a wheel or they choose which one to do, right? And so they either define the word, they act it out, or they draw it. But it's still, they're all different ways of making yourself understood without relying on a shared language, because in this case, with some of these speakers, they may not have a shared language. The person may not speak English. And so they need to make themselves understood in Spanish, in my case. Okay, and then another really, really good way of preparing students for all types of interpersonal communication or interpersonal speaking is indeed Extempore. And I know that it's sponsored by Extempore and you're thinking, well, they paid you to say this, but no, I actually love Extempore and I'm not getting paid to say this. Extempore, if you're familiar with it, are you familiar with Extempore? Let's just do a quick yes or no. Is everybody okay? Grant, okay. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, okay, that's okay. We have a no, that's all right. Grant is not very familiar with it. Okay, some yeses, some no. Okay, very good. Not until yesterday. Okay, wonderful, Shannon. Okay. All right, so crash course, Grant can talk about this for hours, but crash course on Extempore. One type of question you can do on Extempore are things like individual responses. The students read or listen to the question, could be a video like the screenshot you see right there. And then the recording starts automatically. The students don't have time to write it out or record it 10 million times or memorize a script. There's none of that. You heard the question, go, answer. And that's what I love about it. The students need, at first they struggle with it. They're like, wait, where is the pause button, right? Like there's no pause, but we just gotta just answer what you can. So do a little test to get them comfortable with it with easy questions first. And then once they get the hang of it, then you'll see, I know that you don't believe me and someday somebody needs to do a research study, but you'll see how much more comfortable the students get with just expressing yourself. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to have the perfect script. Just answer to the best of your abilities. And that's the beauty of Extempore. Some of the questions that I ask on Extempore, sometimes they're very open-ended questions similar to OPI. Tell me about your studies. Tell me about a typical day. And the tell me about can go anywhere, and that's okay. The students tell me as much as they can. Sometimes it could be decision. It's a written prompt where there's option A and option B. So take a minute to read them. Which one do you choose and why? Right? So it's a little bit of a tiny decision-making task, but I want to see if they can respond to that question after reading it spontaneously. Why? Which one they chose. Propose recommendations or solutions. The little screenshot you saw there was me recording a video saying, I want to be involved in the community. What can I do? Tell me 2 possible recommendations. And sometimes I do tell them to simply because I don't want the student to give me like one tiny little thing. So I've had to adjust it and tell them at least 2. Or solutions, if you have a problem, right? Or maybe the restaurant recommendation, right? I have a birthday party this weekend. Where should I go, right? Things like that. And then the student has to tell you. Circumlocution, that I give them a list of words that I know that we've been talking about a lot. Choose 2, so I still give them choice and define them. So they need to tell me in Spanish, the description, definition, even an example of that word. And then asking questions. You'd be surprised how hard it is to ask a question. If they're not used to it, they're used to always answering questions. They need to also get used to this asking questions. And so if I give them a situation, what would you ask? Or what question would you ask to this person? And it's okay if the instructions are in English, right? So which question would you ask this person? The question they need to ask is in Spanish, but it's okay if for them to quickly understand what I'm asking them, that part is in English. You can also do things like a little video where I say something, and I do that too. I tell them a little something about me, for example, and then they're supposed to respond with a question. Ask me a follow-up on what I just shared with you. And this is also to get them used to this reaction to what someone just said. And many more examples and ideas of extempore questions. If you go to the pre-recorded webinars, you'll see my webinar from, what was it, April, Grant? I don't remember anymore. I lost track of time.
It was late March, early April, I think.
March, April, okay.
Yeah.
From earlier, and you'll see those. There are a lot of input-based, but of course you can adapt them. And of course, there's nothing wrong with input-based. Input-based is still good to prepare for interpersonal. Okay, so let's talk about assessment as the last part of today. So what you may picture when somebody says oral exams or assessment of interpersonal speaking might be something very traditional, like what I have on the screen right now, where the students are being almost given like a laundry list of things they have to talk about, and then using specific vocabulary, specific verb tenses, and even let's throw in the subjunctive in there, why not? It feels like all we're looking at is how well they can use the language. The actual information doesn't matter too much, and it seems like there's no purpose to it other than show me that you can use these structures, right? That's not what I mean when I talk about assessment. By the way, this is the reason why Bill Van Patten says we need to get rid of oral exams. And yes, if this is the oral exam, then I agree. This is just not really a good way of doing oral exams. Now, what I think when I talk about assessment, when I think about are things like something that mirrors and then also informs instruction, something that doesn't have to be entirely separate and different from what you do every day in class. And I think it should reflect the same priorities that you have in all other course components, hopefully. And I know that it's difficult and I struggle with it. All course components need to be in harmony with each other, and all of them reflecting some of your basic pedagogical priorities. And I know it's difficult. You got to start little by little adjusting all of those pieces. So some options in terms of assessment of interpersonal skills. One could be that you have the students interact with each other, similar to what we talked about yesterday, but maybe this time unassisted, meaning that they cannot use outside resources. I think it's still good to give them some useful phrases. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if we're talking about novice learners. Even novice learners, is very small what they can do, right? Like we're not going to have a 20-minute conversation, right? But still give them some useful phrases, and maybe they add a little bit of their own. Memorize phrases, that's okay. Rehearse, that's okay. But then at least they're exchanging some information for a purpose. And then instructor-led interviews or small conversations, if you can, if logistically it works for you, I would highly recommend it. I think it's the best way that you can see their skills, and then you can also participate with them. So what I mean by similar tasks or activities, if you're defining tasks in any particular way, as Claudia probably did in her workshop, if you do them in class, do them as the test. That's essentially what I'm trying to say here. If the activity you did was framed like the one we saw yesterday with confirming predictions, do that as your interpersonal task. It's okay to use the same format. If you do spot the differences, you can do that as a test. If you do finding a time to meet, you can do it as a test. If you do following direction, infogap, you can do them as the test. It doesn't have to be all of a sudden a free-flowing conversation, right? It's okay for interpersonal to be a structured task, just like what you do in class. Instructor-led interviews, like I said, is going to perhaps be challenging depending on your teaching schedule and what you can do. In my case, for example, I have the freedom to say no class this week, instead I'm meeting with groups, right? Little small groups or individually, depending on how many students I have. My co-author, Mary Hawkins, she does it. She assigns the other students to work on something else. It's not that the students have the day off, but the other students are working on something else, maybe something input-based or FBR, free voluntary reading. And then she meets with small groups of students a few minutes at a time. Depending on their level, of course, it depends on how many minutes you're going to take. I have found that if students are novice, high, intermediate, low, even 20 minutes is enough, right? And at some point, we don't have much more to say. Ideally, once again, is I want them to see some sort of a purpose for the information we are exchanging. So I would suggest if you can build in a purpose to it, better than simply let's talk and I'm going to evaluate your language. So the easiest way to make it, to give it a purpose is, again, going back to decision or recommendations, right? So maybe you tell them that the school is thinking of creating a mural, right? What kinds of things they should be in, what colors, what, right? So then you ask them questions, and then we're putting all of that information together. The one that I do with my students is volunteering opportunities. So I tell them that there's a couple of opportunities available. So I'm going to ask them some questions to see which one they would be the best fit for those opportunities. So I ask them things like, what do they study? What interests do they have? Do they have experience working with children, pets, etc.? Planning a field trip, many of the ones that we came up with today in the chat, you can adapt them and turn them into instructor-led interviews. The interview instructions that I give my students, I think it's good to be as transparent as possible so they know exactly what to expect. First, I tell them that all of the topics and all of the questions are going to be related to what we have been talking about and have been talking about and have been talking about. There is no brand new topic we're going to discuss, but I don't give them a list of questions ahead of time, because what ends up happening is they just prepare answers, right? And that's not what I want. Still relatively predictable questions, I think. I do tell them what types of questions I'm going to ask them. And so, for example, I tell them that many times I'm going to say, tell me about, cuéntame sobre, right? So they know that these questions are going to be open, and they have a lot of room to tell me as much as possible. I'm not going to ask them things like, what did X and Y say about this, right? It's not a quiz on course content. I do tell them that the point of this interview, of this exchange, or this conversation is for me to see what they can do on their own with Spanish. And so for doing this conversation, if they use English, I'm going to ask them to please explain to me in Spanish what they meant. So it's not that English is banned, but the point of it is I want to know what they can do in Spanish. And so there's no outside resources allowed, because again, I'm trying to see what they can do themselves, not what Google can do. And how to handle a communication breakdown is important. I tell them that if they don't understand something and they ask me, that's okay. They do not lose points for that. If I need to rephrase, I'll rephrase, and you do not lose points for that. If they forgot a word for something, that's okay. I help them out, right? It's just part of their level, and it's part of communication. And I also give them some sample responses. So I tell them things like, for example, if you answer this, and as you can tell, there's some errors, that's okay. I'm going to keep on going. I understood you. Now, if you answer this, I don't know what you meant. I'm going to ask you, right? Or if you answer this in English, I'm going to ask you. I give them like little sample just for them to understand what I mean by the targeted level. And so let's talk about the grading a little bit, because many of us are in systems where we have to assign grades. And so the grade to me, and I don't like grades. Let me start by saying that. I just don't like grades, but we have to do grades. And at least it has to reflect my pedagogical proficiency-based priorities, right? So I'm focusing on successful communication, on meaning making, of using language in a contextualized way, I want to provide guidance. I'm not there to control how they say things. And so I'm not interested in figuring out if they remember one particular word. Can they still communicate? If they don't remember and if they circumlocute, that is still successful communication to me. And the biggest shift, mind shift that I had to make myself was to, instead of looking so much at the correct use of structures and vocab that we had taught, to instead focus on successful communication. And of course, the key is to define what is successful. To me, successful is at the targeted level. Not everybody's going to agree with me, and I understand and I respect that. But for me, for my context, for my students, I am not going to save 100% to perfection. I am not going to save 100% to beyond level, because I know that my students will get frustrated, right? They will feel that I'm asking them to exceed expectations. I don't like that term. I think what we want to do is we want them to be able to achieve the target that we've been preparing them for. And of course, I need to take into account mode, modality, and task. Going back to the horse, yes, I know they can do a lot more in interpretive, but I know that they're not at the same level with interpersonal, right? So I have to take into account all of that. Definitely not perfect. Nobody's perfect. None of this native-like. Who is native-like anyway? And then not about mastery or memorization, right? So I'm not there to count errors, and I'm not there to figure out if they memorize the vocab or not. The level should be definitely realistic and achievable, right? It's not this impossible, you know, the 100% is for always going above and beyond. So targeted level could definitely include, I mean, if I'm targeting novice, high, intermediate, low, it will include some communication breakdowns, and you can still get 100%. It could include that at times it is difficult to understand them. It could include that sometimes they ask me to repeat, or they ask me to clarify because they didn't understand, or they ask me to speak slower. That is all part of being novice, high, intermediate, low. It means they are at level. And the analogy that I give for picturing this not beyond, not below is an analogy that I got from Claudia Fernandez, which is a beautiful analogy. She uses it for the rubrics, but I think it can work in so many levels. And that is the birthday cake analogy, right? So when I say, like, what is a birthday cake? What are the basic components of a birthday cake? What birthday cake am I expecting, right? For their level of expertise baking cakes, and how much time they had, and how many ingredients they had access to. So if I'm targeting intermediate low, beyond will be something like expecting past narration with good control of tense and aspect. It's just not going to happen. That's the perfectly beautiful, you know, cake that you see there. That's not the cake I'm picturing with my students. But I'm also not picturing the burnt brownie. Right? And that would be when you are definitely below. I'm asking you about your hobbies. What do you like to do in your free time? And all you can give me is a couple words and maybe one fragment that I'm not sure I understood. Now we're going down into novice territory, right? So I want you to be at level. It might be a very small cupcake with some frosting and maybe some M&Ms thrown in there, but that's okay. That's my intermediate low. That's what I'm aiming for. And one thing that I think it's important to clarify is the correspondence or lack thereof between levels and years. I know that I keep saying novice, I keep saying intermediate, and maybe I've done it too. You think novice, level 1, intermediate, level 2 and 3. I wish it worked that way, but 1 year is not one level. Even one semester is not one sub-level. So when we say that your Spanish 1 students or French 1 students can do it, I don't know that they're all novice. Some students move very quickly from novice low to novice high, and you might even have some students almost intermediate low at the end of Spanish 1, maybe, right? And so I think we need to be careful with thinking that, you know, just because they are in something called Spanish 1, that necessarily everybody is novice low or novice mid. And then you get into the intermediate range, and then it seems like it lasts an eternity. I always say that it seems like you're driving through Texas, it will never end, right? So you, from getting from intermediate low to intermediate high, forget it. It's going to take years probably, right? And advanced low, that's a tough hill to climb. Okay, so when we're talking about rubrics, because I know that's what you want, you're like, okay, get to the rubrics already. So yes, I do use rubrics. I have tailored them to the task as much as I can, and I would suggest you do the same, although I understand that maybe your district wants you to use the same rubric for everything, and you know, you got to work with what you got to work with. But if you can, try to tailor it to the task, something that will work for your task in particular. Some general tips, of course, avoid too much overlapping between criteria. Sometimes you see this in even some ACFL rubrics where the comprehensibility and sometimes the language control feel like there's a little bit of overlap, right? That, well, if they don't have this, that affects comprehensibility, so I guess they're getting penalized twice, right? Those are the things we need to think about, think critically about the rubrics we use. Decide what matters most for you. There's nothing wrong with thinking outside the square box rubric. Not everything has to be weighted the same. And of course, accept the fact that there's no perfectly objective rubric, and you're always going to be tweaking your rubrics, and there's always going to be shortcomings with every rubric. The example that I give here, I'll share the link with you so you can see the whole thing. I just wanted to show you how, for example, for me, for my class, I'm looking at whether they're able to provide the information, how comprehensible they are for their level, not native like, but for their level, and then ability to ask questions. They're not all weighted the same. So the ability to ask questions, I only give them 2 points. I'm much more interested in how much information they can give me and comprehensibility. And the rater tips that I'll give you are, and this is the last part, I promise. I've rated Apple, I've rated AP exams, I've rated OPICs, I've rated OPIs, I've rated STAMP, I think I've rated CLEP, just you name it, I've rated them. And so what I have noticed in rating all of these tests is 2 main things. First, even if the rubric is analytic, try your best to rate holistically. How was that aspect, the comprehensibility, the text type, overall, right? So the aspect of the performance overall. You would never hear an OPI person say things like, oh, they had 1 sentence fragment, we got to take them down a level. You would not see that because we're not rating, you know, on a little grid to see if how many sentence fragments they have. You got to look at it overall. 1 sentence fragment doesn't mean that you are no longer intermediate. And then don't rate the breakdown. And this was something that to me was like, whoa, I was doing it myself as a teacher. And I don't know, maybe in psychology they can explain why, but you're listening to somebody and it's almost like you notice all of these things that are different from the target, right? That are non-target like. And it's almost like you get so fixated on all of those things that were different from the target that obscures everything else they were able to do with language. You tend to then rate lower simply because you're looking so much at what they were not able to do. So when you're not rating your students, but when you are evaluating your students' performance, try to focus on the positive and what they can do with the language. Yes, if you notice these patterns that you're really not understanding, then you're not understanding, then they're not giving you more than 1 or 2 words, 1 or 2 words, 1 or 2 words. Okay, that's something that then we notice and then we explain in the rubric. But if they just didn't give you many words for 1 question, 1 particular topic, it could have been the topic, right? And not necessarily their language skills. So try to have more of this holistic and focusing on what they can do with the language. So thank you all so much for coming to my 2 sessions on interpersonal speaking. All of my links are here, which I can share in the chat. So if you want to connect with me, let me see if I can do this. And then we have the link for the, okay, so those are my links. And then we have the link for the survey. Do you want me to share that too, Grant?
I got it right here.
You got it. Okay, you got it. Beautiful. And then I do want to share the link for the rubric if you want to read the whole thing. And I can tell you it's been tweaked many times. And I'm never 100% happy with it, but this is like the best that I could get it for my students in the oral interview, right? Which it was 2 students and me. And I found it that this was the best that I could give them a grade that reflected that students who were at level were getting 100%. And that was really my priority. Okay, so let me see if I have questions that I could answer. I know we're out of time, but I'm happy to stay a little bit longer if people have questions. There were comments about Arabic and Chinese take longer, yes, to go right from one level to the next. Absolutely, yes, yes, yes. And some of the general guidelines you see out there were maybe formulated for French and Spanish, but definitely different languages is going to take longer for sure, right? They may not go as fast from novice low to novice high. Yes. Wonderful analogy. Yes, Wendy, isn't it beautiful? The cake analogy. I love it. That credit to Claudia. The image, oh, the image of the horse, Amanda. Yes, the horse meme. And you know what? I was at the ATSP conference and a company used my meme and put it on their t-shirts. I saw them on the t-shirt. I'm like, hey, that's my meme. And they were like, oh my God, Florencia Henshaw's here. I'm like the meme creator. I don't know, but they're gonna send me a t-shirt. So isn't that nice? I was just like, seriously, silly things I put on social media, and I guess people are putting them on t-shirts.
Well, I thought you were about to say that you were upset with them for sharing it. And then,
no,
you hear about people getting, one of my students was sued by somebody from it was a lawsuit over sharing something they shouldn't have shared on a public website. But I thought you were going to have like this very negative reaction to it instead of, but that's a wonderful thing to share. I think
no. They thought that I would be. I was just shocked. I kept looking at it and going like, wait, that's what I posted on Twitter.
Well, what a compliment.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I just hope they really do send me a t-shirt just because I want the t-shirt. That's all I want. Okay. Okay, do we have questions? I'm sorry, I'm looking at all of the comments.
There were a couple in the chat. I think if you scroll
okay.
up. And somebody would like you to share the QR code for the survey as well.
Oh,
if you may, on your screen.
Yes, hang on. Okay. Is that it?
I believe that Catherine had a question about the 3 images, and then Amanda asked about student self-evaluation.
Catherine, I'm trying to find it. A question from back when you had the 3 pictures. Oh, find the similarities. Yes. No, I don't show them all at the same time. No. So each student has a version. So some students have version A, some of them have B, and some of them have C. I have all 3. Because I don't remember what all of the differences are. And so we are all playing together this game, but each person has only one picture, one version of it. They cannot see anything on the screen. It's not turned on. Just we all have our own image, and we need to find what is common to all 3 versions of it. You don't have to play yourself. You can just be the referee. I don't know, like the person that's keeping score, right? Maybe you can do that, and just so that you monitor that they're, what they're saying is true, right? If somebody says, yes, this is also the same, and you can see the images and that's a difference, then of course, then you can intervene. But they don't see anything on the screen. Each person sees only one. And that way we are exchanging information that we don't know what the other person has. Do you ever have students record themselves, listen to themselves, self-evaluate, peer feedback? That is a great question, Amanda. I don't. I don't do it. The only thing I have done that I guess is like close to it would be in Extempore, but only if I want them to sort of reflect on the grade I gave them. It wasn't like a mandatory thing. The one thing where they do have to listen to themselves is with Talk Abroad, because they do have to watch the recording of the conversations. And then inevitably they are part of the recording. They may be listening mostly to the other person, but they are part of the recording. And then they have to obviously be summarizing, taking some direct quotes from the conversation to support, you know, the things that they're telling me that they learned. So in a way, I guess they have to, but not for the purposes of how did you do yourself. And you know, I don't know why. I'm not saying that there's no value. There could be a lot of value in that. I've done it with some students who wanted to prepare for the OPI. And then they were very motivated to be like, I need to improve, you know, teacher candidates, I need to improve. So we did do that. I asked them to listen to themselves, even transcribe parts of their own answers. And that's where they noticed a lot of the things that they were saying. But I don't do it with my students. And I think it's because I don't want them to be so self-conscious of every word they're saying that maybe I'm going to impact their fluency. They're just, my students are not quite there yet. I think if I were teaching a little bit more advanced students, perhaps I would get them to do something like that. There could definitely be value. It just has to be in the right context so that we're not inadvertently making them second guess every word they're saying. So yeah.
I know we're short on time, but I was just thinking that woven into this whole presentation, there's so many moments when you said, and this is how we would set them up for success in this, or here's how we would debrief on that so that we make sure they get what they're supposed to get out of it. And they're clear on what the expectation was, and they have the language they need to do this. And like that, the way you've woven in, like how you really set up each of these things. And follow up from them.
I think personally, there could be a way of making it work if it was one choice, right? So maybe they don't feel forced to be listening to themselves and reflecting, and then they have some sort of negative association with it. But maybe it's one form of reflection, and maybe other students can do it a little bit different, but it's one option for reflection. And perhaps they may have a different attitude, that maybe they are curious to see, you know, to reflect on their actual recordings. Maybe start it that way, see how it goes, see how many students feel comfortable with it. I think I just don't do it because I wouldn't want to do it myself. And sometimes it's hard, right, to ask them to do something that you wouldn't be 100% comfortable yourself. But I'm not saying there's no value. There's definitely value in doing that. And it's something that I recommend when people ask me, how do I prepare for the OPI? And I say, you have to get comfortable with listening to yourself and realizing all of the things you're saying and being more conscious about that, and so that you can adjust things. But it's tricky sometimes with students. I don't know that I would do it with novice. That's for sure. For presentational speaking, yeah, definitely, yes. And even when you're doing the 4-3-2 activity where they have to say almost the same thing again, that's a little bit of what they're doing, right? They're noticing little things and adjusting them for the next time they record it. Yeah, and you can definitely do 4-3-2 with Extempore, where maybe the students don't know that they're going to answer the exact same question again, but maybe it could be set up that way. And then you tell them, okay, now you're going to answer the same question that you just did, but you only have 3 minutes this time, right? And then you could ask them to listen to all three and figure out how they changed some things, what information they left out. I think that could be a good way of making them listen to each other, to themselves, without this pressure of what did you notice. Maybe it's more of the comparing the 4-3-2 and how their versions changed. I think that could be a good way of incorporating the listening to yourself. In the 4-3-2, I mean, the topic could be very simple. It could just be, tell me about a typical day. It could just be, tell me about your friends, right? It doesn't have to be, tell me, what do you think about this political view? Like, it doesn't have to be that you know, difficult, but you'll see how they start changing some things, adjusting some things. So I think that could be also good for them to do, to go back and listen to their 3 versions. Did I miss, Catherine had another question or no? No, okay. Four, 3, 2 is stuck on my head. Okay. Okay, is that a good thing, Mary? I hope that's a good thing. So if anybody's thinking like, what is she talking about 432? Can anybody tell me what 432 is? So I'm going to share a video with you if you want to watch it. And then this is a video explaining 432 and then also how you can tweak it if you want to. And I know Grant probably is thinking we don't have any more time. We have to go. All right, I'm just going to put the video here. So that is the so that's the video explaining 432 and then some alternatives. And then it's a video from my own channel. So if you go to my channel, there is a playlist called Unpacking Activities. And many of the things that I mentioned today are discussed there, like the two-way crossword puzzle, a lot of the info gaps, right? And things like that. So you can check it out. Okay, we are very much out of time. Sorry.
That is okay. A huge, massive thank you to Dr. Henshaw for all of the work she has put into it. Claps, snaps, fire emojis, whatever you have, share them with us. She's done fantastic. This was a wonderful two-piece workshop. We're so thankful for you, Florencia. Thank you so much for contributing. Please stay tuned. I saw a couple of people were interested in Extempore. We have all sorts of presentations coming up later today, some tomorrow, some later this week. Feel free to attend, look at schedules, you can learn all about it. And of course, you can contact us as well. We have there are two people in here right now who have a presentation tomorrow, Dora and Catherine, also Callie. Our two Extempore ambassadors this year, they'll be presenting tomorrow on communicative tasks, some of which will definitely feature the interpersonal mode, so you won't want to miss that. Oh, and of course, Thomas is mouthing this right now to me. Joe Barcroft, who is also within this presentation, has a two-piece workshop as well on Thursday and Friday. Not to mention Claudia Fernandez, who also presented with us earlier today. So it's really just never ending. And Amanda, yes, of course. Well, Amanda, look, trust me, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings here. There's so much going on in my head, I swear.
I know,
indeed, I think the word extravaganza is really a fitting word for this whole thing that we have going on. So all sorts of cool stuff. Check it out. Look back to Sky. Check out our YouTube channel. Everything will be there at the end. And if that is all,
I love Amanda's comment. Well, yeah, your analogy with the cake is going to explode. I told you it's going to go viral. So that's how we are uploading presentations now. Big cake with M&Ms and icing and candles. I love that. Thank you. Yes.
Florencia has made the cake. She has put the icing on it. If that is all, then I will stop recording and we will see you all later, hopefully later this week.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you guys. Take care. See you.
Bye.